Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first official lecture of the semester. So we are going to start off with chapter 1, of course, and this goes into the science of psychology. So we're going to go into what psychology is, the different subfields of psychology, as well as some history, and then we're also going to designate a good portion of this to research methodologies, which really drives home the scientific foundation of psychology. So we'll break into all of that as we go through, but for this specific lecture, we're just going to go into what psychology is, the different subfields, and then we're going to delve a little bit into history, just to give you a bit of a platform to understand why psych is the way it is now and where it came from. So in order to know where you're going, you need to know where you came from. So I do like to do a little bit of an introduction of the history. Your textbook goes into significant detail about all of the contributors to the current status of psychology, all of the people who have contributed and had their own methodologies, theories, so on and so forth. But I have selected some of my more, I don't want to say favorite, but the ones that I feel have contributed the most and have really been formative. So we'll go through all of those. The other thing I did want to mention, and forgive me for not mentioning this in the orientation video, is you will notice that we go drastically out of order. By the way, the chapters, like we're starting with chapter 1 because it is the best introduction chapter, but then we go straight to chapter 13. Chapter 13 is social psychology, and the reason why we go into social psych is because social psychology looks at, I don't want to say normal behavior, but more mainline behavior of our species. And in order to understand any variation or level of abnormality, we need to understand quote-unquote normal first, or what is represented by the majority first. So there is a bit of a tweak to the way that I do things. So like I said, we're going to go into social psych after this, and then after that we're going to go into developmental psychology, which is chapter 9. So again, forgive me for not going over this in the orientation lecture, but I have your attention now, so here we go. So we do chapter 1, so we get our good foundation. We know where we came from to know where we're going. Then we need to get a foundation, or excuse me, an understanding of what normal behavior is, or what tends to be the norm for human operations, both individually and within a herd setting, because we are animals, so we'll talk about that. And then from there we go into development, because we need to understand how we got to that majority behavior, how we all got to be where we are now. And these are actually some of the biggest chapters. Social and developmental are my two favorite chapters because they answer questions that you didn't even realize that you had, and they do get pretty intense. They're very real. All of the chapters are real, but they're my two favorites, so they kind of tend to come to life more so than most. And then from there, we do kind of tend to be a bit more follow the standard procedure. So from there, we go into consciousness, and then we go into memory and learning. Memory and learning have to go together because in order to learn, you have to be able to remember, and those just kind of tend to go hand in hand pretty good. And then from there, we'll go into cog and personality, intelligence, and then we bring chapters 2 and 3 up before we do chapters 14 and 15. So the reason why the last section is sensation and perception and brain and behavior is because I think it's best to have a strong and a fresh understanding of neuroanatomy before we get into psychopathology, which is chapter 14, that's diagnostics, which is, if you're not required to be here, that chapter is probably why you're taking this class. Psychopathology is the most fascinating chapter because it's just understanding the disorders and getting better appreciation for the spectrum of the human existence. So we go over neuroanatomy and functionality, And then from there, we go into psychopathology. So we understand brain anatomy to understand what a sick brain, what a healthy brain versus a sick brain looks like. And then from there, what types of symptomatologies occur. And then after that, we wrap up with chapter 15. So I teach you how to fix it all. Not really. You just kind of get a little bit of a glimpse as to what we have there. So that was a really winded way to explain the chapter sequence, but it's just how I've always done it, and it feels better to me to kind of build and save like the biggest, most dense chapters for later. It works best for me. So let's go ahead and get into chapter 1, which, like I said, we're going to start off with just what psych is in the different subfields. So also, you'll realize in all of my lectures, I love my memes, I love my GIFs. It's how I make these lectures my own. But also this right here starts analyzing everyone will 100% happen. It's going to make Thanksgiving at home super fascinating for you. So I'm happy to provide that service. I'm just kidding. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Here we go. All right. So what is psychology? Okay. Psychology, there's actually quite a few different interpretations of it, but in short, it's just the science and the understanding of the human mind and behavior. So what we're doing is we are looking at understanding the human mind, which we're going to break apart all of that, and behavior, and how those two go hand in hand. Okay, because when it comes to functionality and just general operations of a human being, there's behavior and cognitive operations or mental processes. Mental processes consist of things like learning, memory, thinking, dreams. And when I say thinking or thoughts, that is probably one of the most loaded words. Because when you say thinking, that within that umbrella term comes things such as negative thoughts, positive thoughts. You could have pathological thoughts, meaning they can be very, very negative, where you might live in a more depressive state. Or very, very manic, which is a very elevated mood. That's the total opposite of depressive. So thinking, just under the realm of mental processes, that one thinking bullet, again, it's extremely loaded because it houses all of the different dynamics and constellation of thoughts, different thought processes, and the way that people interpret and relate to other people. Those are all thoughts, and they dictate quite a bit about how we interact with others, how we interpret others, how we perceive things, perceive events, react versus respond to things, and then also add in the emotionality of it. So there's going to be emotionality linked in with all of those. So again, psychology, just to kind of zoom back out, look on the more macro level, we're looking at how you think about things, or all of the mental processes and behavior, why people do what they do. And it's a very loaded field. The goal of it truly is to simply understand mental activity, social interactions, and how people acquire and learn behaviors. That's really what we're trying to lock down, which sounds so simple, and it's actually the most complex thing ever. But what we're doing in psych is trying to not only understand, but kind of think proactively about human behavior and the way that we think about things. Because if we can say, all right, we know X, Y, and Z about human behavior and mental processes, if we know what it looks like in this light, maybe we can help someone who is operating in a different type of light. Or if someone is operating in this very elevated light, perhaps we can see what their dynamic is and how we can apply that to other people. So a lot of it is just it's just translating what we learn through the study of human behavior and of mental processes and behavior, and how we can translate that to other populations. So some of the other factors that we want to consider as well is what comes first, behavior or thought? Is that an all or nothing thing? Like, is it always behaviors that are going to dictate thoughts, or your thoughts going to dictate behaviors? And that might even sound like a very simple concept, but there's going to be a lot of ebb and flow to that. And what you're going to learn in psych as we go through this semester is the most commonly heard thing that you're going to hear is, it depends. There really is not any hard and fast or tried and true answer to a psych question. For example, when it comes to diagnostics, there's truly only 2 disorders that we can confidently say we know where it comes from. And those are both trauma-rooted disorders. Post-traumatic stress disorder, we know where that comes from, trauma. And then dissociative identity disorder, which is formerly referred to as multiple personality disorder. That is an extreme traumatic response. And yes, we will of course go into DID when we go through psychopathology. It's one of the most elusive, fascinating, and also devastating disorders that we have. Very rare, but it does exist. So what we're looking at is just the different perceptions of things, how people respond to things. Another big component that we're going to discuss is that we are animals. A lot of times we forget that. We forget that we are actually primitive. We almost tend to overlook that we are animalistic. Although I feel like 2020 has kind of reminded us of that a little bit. That might be too soon to comment, so forgive me. But we truly are animals. Granted, we live in these very sophisticated caves. Our barter system now is far more immaculate than it was, however long ago, Flintstone era. But we've greatly evolved in terms of our environment, and we also have become more sophisticated in the way that we engage each other. We're a bit more civil now, sometimes. But those animalistic tendencies, our herd mentalities, that is all still there. Very, very strong. If you corner an animal, something's going to happen. Same thing with a person. So we're going to look at a lot of our overlooked animalistic tendencies, why they show up when they do, how they show up when they do, how to identify when something's going to happen. Just a lot of those little different scenarios and dynamics that you wouldn't usually think about in a scientific way. I'm going to show you how to do that. And it's quite fascinating how all that works. As well as the different mindsets, going back to the whole idea of us being animals. When you think about animals, we can really kind of be broken down, if you really, really want to dumb it down, into prey versus predators. And how a prey animal versus a predator are going to have different approaches to things, different ways that they interact with each other, different ways that they can interact with, not to say strangers, but the unknown, if you will, the unfamiliar. So there's a variation in confidence there. So prey versus predator dynamic is very, very different in terms of how we react to things, how we respond to things. We do tend to, even though we are predators, we do tend to have some prey characteristics, and we'll discuss this as we go through social psych. So that was just a little bit of a teaser there for you. Also, we're going to talk about, in terms of behaviors, why people might have destructive behavioral patterns. Why some people might do the same thing over and over and over again. Why, like something that's dumb or silly, like for example, well, this isn't dumb or silly, but this is something, a real world scenario. You see someone going back into the same abusive relationship over and over and over again. Why some people are attracted, in terms of relationships, to a very distinct personality type, and those relationships always fail. Why does that person keep going back to that very specific type? We'll talk about that. Little Freud intro right there for you. Or why do people just do these self-destructive, these behaviors that tend to cause more harm than good? Why do some people do that? So we'll look into that quite a bit as we go through, and it really does it. We'll end up answering some questions that you really didn't even know that you had, and it's very enlightening. It's very powerful. All right, so that's enough of me rambling about what psych is. And also, we already kind of covered why we study psychology. Again, it's just to understand mental activity, social interactions, and how people acquire and learn different behaviors. But there's far more to it than just talk therapy, and that's really what we're going to talk about now. Are the different subfields of psychology? Because historically, when you think about psych, this is probably the setting that you think about. You think about a therapist, right? You think about going to a therapist's office or a counselor, sitting on this, laying on a couch, and the therapist sits behind you. A very stereotypical presentation. Now, in psych, this actual imagery is super rare. Super, super rare. Psych is a huge field with many, many, many subfields, and only about 2 or 3 of those subfields actually do practice clinical, or actually do practice in a clinical setting, or actually do provide therapy or some type of service to the clinical population. Most other people or professionals in the psych field are academics or researchers. That's primarily what's going on in the psych world, is research. While, again, the couple other subfields, granted there's mass presentation in those, like the clinical fields really do take up a strong majority of psych, mostly because they make most of the money. But most of the subfields are research based. All right, so here is a list of some of the different subfields of psychology. So I'm just going to go through these somewhat briefly. And honestly, as we go through the chapters, quite a few of these are going to come up, and actually do have their own chapters themselves. Like experimental psychology, we'll talk about that actually in the next lecture. Social psych, or to give you a little hint on that one. Clinical, we're going to go over. So actually, as we go through the textbook, each each chapter really is designated to a field. Now, we're not going to go over all of them. Like, we're not going to go over industrial organizational psych, but because that's a very specialty subfield. But each chapter really is represented by a different subfield. Okay, so in all of these, as we go through, can truly be used in virtually any line of work or in any situation. So this course, as we go through the semester, will arm you with some really helpful knowledge, regardless of what field of work you decide to go into. It'll help with family life, it'll help with relationships, with friendships, understanding why someone is behaving as the way that they are, just being able, or even yourself, like, as I've gone through my training, I've been able to catch myself and be like, oh, you're doing that. I see what you're doing. And I'll be able to kind of catch myself in certain situations. And it's really helpful. So hopefully you get more out of this class than just a grade. I really am trying to structure this so you can take quite a few of these little nuggets of knowledge and take them with you throughout your life. And you can apply them, again, to relationships, school, work, family, and truly psych is present in virtually every single field of work. Everything. If you go into medicine, if you go into law, if you go into retail, if you go into sales, if you go into business, especially business, because business is basically synonymous with relationships. And we're going to learn how to navigate relationships and the different relationship dynamics in there. The stock market, you go into that. If you really think about it, stock markets are truly linked to emotions. But that's a whole other course to get into. So, but again, the whole point of this is that psych is going to show up in virtually everything. So let's go in. I'm just going to give you a quick little rundown on each of these different fields. It looks like a lot, but I'll go fast. So the first one that we're going to look at is developmental psych, and that's actually going to be in chapter 9, which is the chapter after next that we're going to go over. And developmental psych is very well named because it's looking at human development. Developmental psychology looks at everything that happens from the moment of conception to the moment of expiration. Everything. The primary thing that we look at is the developmental years. So a horrifying fact is that, I want to say fact because we'll talk about how we can negate absolutes as we go through, but a little tidbit, you are you by the time you're 4. Everything after that is just kind of polished, but you are you by 4. So in developmental psych, especially when we go through that chapter, we're mostly going to live in infancy and toddlerhood because that's where the magic happens. Developmental psych really, again, it looks at the whole gamut of the lifetime, but when we go through that chapter, we're mostly going to live in infancy and toddlerhood because that really lays the foundation for who you are right now in this exact second and everything that got you there. Okay. Educational psych, we're looking at how people learn different things and how we can structure different platforms to improve learning, to improve retention. So for example, Launchpad was founded by educational psychologists. It was built by educational psychologists in order to really maximize learning and retention, interaction with the student, just how to make it a better experience overall. So the evolution of learning and the evolution of learning materials, school programs, different things like that, that is owed to educational psychologists. Experimental psychologists, these guys do experiments. They do a lot of the like traditional research setups. So in the next lecture that I'm going to post tomorrow night, we'll go over different research methodologies and how imperative experimental psych is to the field. And that is that's this, experimental psych. Forensic psychology is the marriage of law and psychology. It's really quite fascinating. Any licensed clinician can provide forensic services. It's very, very stressful. These are the ones who go to court. They will perhaps help out with parental fitness. They will help out with crimes, a whole gamut of different things. But forensic psychology is the marriage of law and psychology. It's very fascinating. I know you guys are probably thinking, like, if you love crime shows, like, ooh, this would be my thing. It's mostly just a lot of paperwork. So not to get your hopes up on it. It's a lot of paperwork. Health psychology focuses on promoting health as well as the prevention and treatment of disease and illness. It also focuses on understanding how people react, cope, and recover from illness or live with chronic illness. So people who live with chronic pain or lifelong diseases, that this is just kind of their cross to bear for the rest of their lives, that's a very different mental process that person has to live in. That's a very different world. So there needs to be a field of psych that caters specifically to that population, that kind of operate in a different physiological state. So that's what these guys do. Biopsych, within biopsych, we're looking at, it's more of like the neuro side. So we're looking at the brain neurotransmitters, which we'll talk about that. Neurotransmitters are like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, GABA, stuff like that. So in biopsych, we're looking at neuroanatomy and how brain chemistry impacts behaviors. So a lot of it is going to be, this is chapter 2 basically, the brain and bio chapter. Really, really fascinating. Clinical psych is the actual diagnosis and treatment of disorders. So these are the docs who do a lot of assessments. The 2 docs that I work for are both clinical psychologists. or work with rather. We work as a team. But the two docs that I work with are both clinical psychologists, and that's exactly what we do. We assess, we diagnose, and we treat. So how I was telling y'all that I do psychological evaluations, that is a part of the assessment. So we'll have a client come in and they will say, I'm experiencing X, Y, and Z. We'll do a full battery of assessments, different tasks, different measures that we can do. We could have a full battery of different things that we can have the client do to get a really well-rounded picture of that person, what they're capable of in terms of like what their skill set is, the way that they think about things, different behaviors, the way that they problem solve, a whole bunch of stuff. And we can, after doing that, we can have usually can have a well-informed diagnosis. So the goal of assessment is to have a correct diagnosis, because in order to provide the correct treatment, you need to have the correct diagnosis. So making sure that a client has the correct diagnosis is going to dictate the treatment that they get. So it just rolls down the hill. So if there's an error in the assessment, the diagnosis is going to be off, so the treatment's going to be off. So it's really a very detailed, very tedious process to assess, diagnose, and treat. But if you get it right, you can really drastically improve the quality of life for a person. And it's we've seen some miracles, and it's pretty amazing. It's pretty when it's on point, it's a game changer. It's pretty incredible. Okay, cognitive psychology. So cognitive psychology studies mental processes, including how people think, perceive, remember, and learn. So we're going to go through all of this when we go through the memory and the learning chapters. This is a really fascinating component because we're looking, again, at how people think about things, perceive things, learn, remember. All that is in cognitive psych, and there's 2 chapters dedicated to that. Comparative psychology is the study of animal behavior and how it compares in contrast to human behavior. So granted, yes, we are animals, right? But we're a different species. So we're comparing how we as animals function in contrast to another species and what we can learn from that. A lot of primates, there's a lot of research that's looking at certain similarities and how we can learn about primates just by looking at what we do, and vice versa. So you can speak both ways to that. Counseling psychology, very well named because it focuses on providing therapeutic treatments. So counseling psychology, these are psychologists who focus primarily in counseling. They don't necessarily do testing, that is primarily in the clinical world, but they do provide therapeutic services, so they provide treatment. Industrial organizational psychology, these guys go into big businesses or even small businesses, they go into any business, and they find ways to maximize efficacy within production. So these guys will go into these big companies, again, or small, whatever, and say, okay, well, you have this person here, this group of people doing this, like maybe we can change it up a little bit. So they find ways on increasing workplace productivity and related issues such as the physical and mental well-being of employees. So they really help to kind of improve the work-life experience and improve efficacy. So if you like math and you really like psych, this might be a cool field to look into. There's not a lot of people in this field because it is very research heavy and very, very it's tough. It's very tough, but it pays exceedingly well. Very, very, very well. All right, so then we have school psychologists. These are the unsung heroes of the school system. These people go in, they work with a wide range of they work with the educational systems to help children with emotional, social, academic issues that might be having some stuff going on at home. So school psychologists will go into the school setting If there's a child that's having an emotional issue or a learning issue, they'll assess them and they will come up with a plan for appropriate accommodations for the child and find ways to make life better, to make whatever's going on, to perhaps mitigate it to the best degree that they can. Social psych, we already spoke a little bit about what social psych is. Social psych is just looking at how people interact with each other. Groups versus isolated, just different social interactions, different dynamics. So we'll spend a good bit of time on that chapter. And last one we're going to look at is sports psychology. If you are big into sports and you really like psych, this might be up your alley. So these guys provide therapeutic support to athletes. Oftentimes, sports psychologists will be like the dream job for a sports psychologist would be picked up by a pro team, and they provide very specific therapeutic services to the athletes. Because if you think about it, like these people are under a lot of pressure. Professional athletes are under a lot of pressure, so they help work with them on their athletic performance, and just the way that they handle that type of pressure, how to improve performance, increase motivation, just kind of keep that drive up. But again, in the world of psych, most are in the clinical field, okay? And again, the clinical field and the counseling field are really the only ones that actually do provide therapy. The rest of these guys, this is all research. All research. So like I said, there are quite a few subfields of psych. Only 2 provide therapy, but they eat up a strong piece of the pie of psych in terms of like representation. So there's quite a few in there. But clinical, it's very, very competitive. It's fascinating. You get exposed to a lot, but it's a tough job. It's tough. All right, so now we are going to transition into the history of psychology. So y'all know what psych is now. We got a good grasp on it. And now we're going to go into how we got to where we are, right? So again, another meme as promised. Carl Jung, anyone? No? Okay, we'll go into Carl Jung when we go through the personality chapter. He worked alongside Sigmund Freud for a little bit. They worked on psychoanalysis, and he had a really unique approach to personality, why you are the way you are, and it has to do with like a collective unconscious, a collective conscious, and archetypes, and it's pretty fascinating, but we'll talk about Carl Jung when we go through the personality chapter. So, first off, where did psych even come from? How did this whole idea come to be, right? So, it actually, at the deepest, most foundational, most formative root, it is the marriage of philosophy and science. And which both philosophy and science have very, very, very historic roots. And, it was only a matter of time before these two hit and, made a school of thought, baby. But psych is virtually the marriage of philosophy and science. So some of the questions that we've been asking since the dawn of time are going to be like, why do we exist? Do we exist? Is this real? What is my purpose? What is thought? How does that work? How do we know any of this is real? Or is this just the Matrix? All of those different thoughts about why we are the way that we are, it's just general existence. Those are all philosophical questions, and they have been asked, again, since the dawn of time. And plenty of people have some kinds of answers to them, but what we're doing in psych is we are attempting to answer these questions about what makes people tick, why some people are super motivated and just get it done, and other people will just kind of exist barely through life. You know what I'm saying? Like they're just on autopilot. Like there's no fire, there's no life. There's just like, what's the difference between the two? They're both humans. So what's the difference? So what we're trying to do is answer those questions through scientific means. And that's really what's going on in psych, is we are trying to answer these profound, super heavy philosophical questions through scientific means. Basically, with the scientific method. That's what we're trying to do. And since so many people have actually tried to do that, again, psychology attempts to answer the philosophical questions through scientific means. Schools of thought were created. The school of thought are just different philosophies or different concepts that you can subscribe to. So what we're looking at here, truly, psychology is the science of thought and behavior. And it's simply how we're trying to quantify and even beyond quantify, but also magnify, like answer a question through scientific means, answer a philosophical question through scientific means, get some type of tangible or quantified answer to it and say, okay, I know this now. I can hold it in my hand. How can I apply it to all these other people? I know this about depression now. How can I apply this to all of these people who struggle with depression? How do I do that? And that's what we're doing exactly in psych, is we're finding the ways to quantify, get ready for it, the human condition. So, and also the human experience, which they're not the same, they're not synonymous. The human condition is understanding that our existence is going to be placed on a spectrum, okay? And it is how far we can traverse in our experiences and in our emotions, how big we can live, how small we can feel, how happy and joyful we can be, versus the total opposite, how deep and dark we can actually go, the true depths of human existence, right? And then our experience of that all, that would be the human experience. So we're also trying to understand and quantify the human condition, because when it comes to the human condition, again, people tend to exist on this spectrum of quote-unquote normalcy, which is where, again, normal is just where most people are represented, like average functioning, like no psychopathology, no like clinical abnormality, meaning whatever you're struggling with, it's just a part of the human condition. It's just a part of life, right? When it goes beyond that spectrum of the human condition, that is when it becomes clinical. That is when it becomes depression or mania if you're struggling with bipolar disorder. If your thoughts become so bizarre and outlandish, perhaps it's going into the world of psychosis, which is a disconnect from reality. These are all just little teasers. Don't worry if I know I'm throwing a lot of jargon at you, but this kind of tends to get people like, ooh, what's that? So they're like little teasers for you. But what we're doing here is we are trying to answer these questions through scientific means, because if we can quantify it, we can find a way to practically apply it to larger representative populations. So, for example, what would be a good one? Let's think. Why are some people, let's just keep it simple. Depression. Why are some people depressed? Okay, so if we can answer that through clinical means or scientific means, and we can quantify it, we can apply that to other clinical populations. I know that sounds kind of very, very superficial. We'll get into far more depth as we go. I just wanted to give it something a little bit more tangible to hold on to. But again, that's really what we're doing. We're answering these questions through scientific means. And again, from that, different schools are formed. Different schools of thought have been formed. So one of the first names I really want to give credit to is Rene Descartes. He is so formative in a lot of the approaches that I take to things. And I actually was kind of, I would subscribe to his philosophies for quite some time before even really realizing that I had these connections. And it's kind of intense, so, stay with me. But Rene Descartes, he was a rationalist, which believed that true knowledge comes through reasoning. So his premise was question everything. That's truly, truly, truly what he ran home with, was question everything. How do you know that to be fact? How do you know that to be true? how can anything be an absolute true or an absolute lie or false? How can that be? So he believed that we need to question and reason through virtually everything. And that degree of truth, again, is nothing but a degree. So he also he really worked into the whole theory of dualism, which is the mind and the body are separate yet intertwined, and they coexist in two realms of matter and energy, which we'll circle back to that, because what I really want to get into right now is actually methodological skepticism. Okay, so methodological skepticism, this really is the crux of his belief of being a rationalist. So methodological skepticism means what he did was he attempted to figure out what was undeniable, what he actually knew to be true. All right? So how can we determine anything to actually exist? So if you think about it, we experience the world through our senses. Right? We have 5 senses. So we have sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, right? So we experience the world through those 5 senses. Now, those 5 senses send the data to our brain for interpretation. Who's to say that some degree of error has not occurred from point A to point B? Who's to say? Who's to say that our sensory detection was not skewed in some way? Who's to say that that sensory detection was not damaged or altered on its transmission to your brain? Who's to say that nothing happened in the interpretation of that sense? There's no way to determine that, right? So you have to kind of incorporate a degree of human error in that, right? I wear contacts or glasses, so that means that one of my senses 100% is flawed, which means without my contacts or glasses, I get a faulty version of a sense. So Rene Descartes really spoke to that in saying that how are we actually supposed to know what's true when everything that we experience in the world around us is only the versions that our senses allow us to have? I'm going to say that again because it's kind of heavy. It's very difficult to know what is actually true and accurate because we are only allotted the versions of what's going on around us of what our senses allow us to have. So right now, you interpreting what's going on in this lecture, that's a version. It might not actually be what I'm saying. It's your interpretive version of it. So our senses they're imperfect. Everything is subject to error. So everything that you interpret and experience is simply a version of what's actually happening. So that said, how do we know what's actually true? Right? How do we know what actually exists? How do we know if something is not just your skewed perception of it or true hard cold fact? So that's what he tried to do, is he really tried to lock down what actually is real. And that is where cogito ergo sum, which I'm presume some of you all have at least heard that. That means I think, therefore I am, which means I think, so I know that I myself do exist, because my thoughts in my head are not subject to any senses. So I know that I exist, but everything else is merely an interpretation. But I know that I exist because I can think inside my own head. However, joke's on him though, because language was taught, and it's a fabricated form of communication. So, and language dictates emotion and experience and interpretation on things. So there's a little bit of gray even in cogito ergo sum. So since he is questioning everything, of course he's going to we'll take this back now to the theory of dualism. And again, it's just saying that the mind and the body are separate yet intertwined. So are you your body? Are you your mind? Are you one and the same? How connected are they? Do they exist in different realms yet share a vessel? So that's really what he was kind of trying to tease out. And he determined that the theory of dualism is that we exist of matter and non-matter. So the matter, of course, is your physical body. It's merely the vessel. Okay, it's measurable. It's something that's tangible, attainable. It is quantified matter, quantified self. And then the non-matter side, that is more of mind and spirit. That's more transcendent. Those are the psychological processes. So if you want to actually take this back to the definition of psychology, it truly does align with the theory of dualism. Because, again, in psychology, we're looking at mental processes and behavior. Behavior is physical. It's tangible. It's measurable. But then with the mental processes side, that is also the non-matter, the non-material substance of the mind and the spirit. So that, if you want to take it even a step further, who are you? Are you this vessel? Are you more than that? Are you energy? Are you your soul? Does the soul actually exist? So, I know that got kind of deep really quick there, and I don't want to infringe on anyone's beliefs. That's the beauty of existing, is you can believe whatever you want to. It's yours. But these are just questions about how we operate. Like, are you purely your brain? Which means that, once you pass, like if someone holds your brain in their hand, like, are they actually holding you, your personality, or does that exist elsewhere? Does your personality, does your soul actually have an address? Can we physically locate that? So that's what Rene Descartes was really looking at, is that, does that energy, that emotional, that mental process, that transcendent energy of the spiritual self, is that synonymous with the vessel, or are they separate? Big questions. And do you know what? Don't stress about that. Honestly, a lot of these questions, I don't think we're supposed to know the answers to. I think they're too big for us. But we can certainly talk about them, because talking about them, that's where growth takes place. So keep talking about it, even when we move on to the next part, which we're about to do. Here we go. Okay, so what we have here is a beautiful little sunflower, right? So take a moment, look at it, enjoy it, experience it, all right? So perhaps even if you want to, you don't have to. In class, we usually do have some fun with this, but I'll usually ask people to write down what they experience, what they see, what they feel, what goes on with it, and then we share. So just take that piece with you. Make a mental note, or even jot down what you see, what you feel. If this gave you an emotion, perhaps you had a little flashback to like a really warm time. I don't know, something. Whatever it did for you. Okay, so just make a mental note of that. So that right there, writing out your experience, that is what we call introspection. And introspection was founded by Wilhelm Wundt. There's a way, I'm wrapping this all back around, don't worry. This was founded by Wilhelm Wundt in 1879 in Germany, which was the birth of the very first psychology lab. So what you just did when I showed you guys this picture, and I said, look at this, tell me what you feel, what you see, how you experience it, and if you did write it down, good for you. The whole point in class is I would have everyone write down and then pick a couple victims and say, okay, who, share what you see. And there would be some overlap, but for the most part, everyone would have a different experience of it, which means that no two interpretations are the same, no two experiences are the same, and no two sets of eyes are going to see or interpret something the same way. Side note to that. You are you based off of every single thing that you have experienced to date. No two paths are identical, which means that who you are right now in this exact second is an accumulation of everything that you have survived until now. The good, the bad, and the ugly. You are you based off of those milestones. And people might kind of have similar paths, but it's not going to be exactly the same. And those experiences make you see this a certain way. They make you perhaps feel something. They make you perhaps see something. You might even smell something seeing this. Memories are powerful. So what we're doing here in introspection, or what Wilhelm Wundt was trying to do, was trying to quantify human experiences. And that simple, like, write down what you see, how you feel, what it does for you, that was the birth of experimental psychology. And it took off from there. And again, the whole purpose of it was to be able to quantify and have measurable interpretations of people's experiences. So his goal was truly to measure the human experience. He wanted to get to a point to where he could actually capture and quantify consciousness. That's really what his goal was. And it spurred quite a few different fields of schools of thought. There we go. So again, when it comes to when it comes to psych, the first things that we really focused on were conscious experiences and interpretation of things. So that's exactly what René Descartes did as well. Descartes was looking at how, like, what can we prove to be true? Let's look at your thoughts. Let's look at your experiences. Are they in fact true? That's what he was looking at. 2 + 2. Who's to say that's 4? What is a number? What is a letter? Someone just told you these things, so we have them memorized. So, just challenging those things to actually get a grip on what is to be true. So looking at that conscious experience. Same thing with Wundt. That's what he wanted to do, was capture the conscious experience, but take it to the next level from what Descartes did, and not necessarily just prove it, but he wanted to quantify it. So that spurred other schools of thought as well. So these are some of the guys that we're going to talk about rather briefly here. So after Wundt, enter Edward Titchener, and Titchener was actually a student of Wundt. They worked together in the lab, and he pioneered what we call structuralism. So he kind of took this a little bit as a subfield of Wundt in his idea of capturing consciousness and quantifying it. But he believed that consciousness, he took it to the next level, he believed that consciousness could be broken down into its basic underlying components, which would make it easier to understand. So for example, for Wundt, if you take this picture and you explain your experiences, you say, okay, well, I see yellow, I see pollen, I see green, I feel warmth, I smell a flower, or I smell pollen, I smell fresh air, whatever it is. So that right there is a means to break down, those are like the underlying components of this. So this whole image gave me all of those experiences, and those are underlying components of that experience. So according to Titchener, if you want to really understand something, you need to look at all of the individual little pieces of it. Another way to explain it, if you want to understand a house, you need to look at each individual brick. If you want to understand its foundation, why it is the way that it is, you look at each individual brick. So again, he thought that you could break down the elements of consciousness or conscious experience to better understand the mind scientifically. So he also wanted to understand the mind's interpretation of that. So he wanted to kind of tease everything apart, really wanted to tease it apart. So that was one of the schools of thought. Okay, and again, right now we're living in the world of conscious experiences and just conscious comprehension, basically. All right, so what is science without a rival, right? So now enter William James. So William James, he was super practical, okay? He argued that the mind consisted of a stream of consciousness, right? So once Tichenor came on the field and was like, no, you got to take everything apart, you got to tease it down to, or comb it down to its nitty-gritty details in order to understand the experience. William James enters and says, there's absolutely no way that you can do that. If you take it apart, you lose its context. You need to understand consciousness and the content that it is presented in. So according to James, if you want to understand a river, you can't go up to the river with a cup and scoop a cup of water out. That changes the whole dynamic of the water. You can't understand the river by looking at a cup of water from it. That is what William James is saying. James is also saying you can't understand an entire movie by simply watching the trailer. You need to watch the entire thing. You can't watch it in freeze frames. You need to watch the whole stream of the experience. So these guys kind of dueled it out a little bit. Because, again, what's science without some drama? Gotta get some of that in there. That's what William James, that's what he was advocating for, which personally makes a bit more sense to me. You got to look at something in the content, or in its appropriate context. But it basically completely negated the whole concept of structuralism and introspection, because those two, structuralism and introspection, attempt to capture the experience. And by capturing it, you dilute it. Now, the other component that James is famous for, amongst many others, was functionalism. So he looked at conscious experiences, but he also looked at how functional certain behaviors and certain mental processes are. So he was greatly influenced by Charles Darwin, and which actually makes a lot of sense as we go into this. So he examined how different functions serve the mind. So like the utility or the purpose of the behavior. Why, for example, if you walk up to like a bonfire and it's really hot, why you might all of a sudden back away without even thinking about it. Oh, I wonder why. Because it's hot, so it's a survival piece. Or if you eat a food and it makes you sick, you hopefully, if you listen to evolution, won't eat that food that made you sick again. So those instincts are, they're evolutionarily driven for the sake of survival. So he was looking at how people have certain remembering distinctions, some people having good navigational skills, like gut navigational skills, survival instincts, different things like that. And how those all kind of come, what's the word I'm looking for? They basically come stock with being human, right? So let me kind of break this down, because in case you're getting a little lost with it. So functionalism is saying that we all have different mental processes and behaviors that are designated to keep us alive, and they have been passed down through the generations of our species purely for our survival. Simplest way to put this. You ever get a bad feeling about something? Probably have. That's functionalism. And that's why a lot of times people will say, listen to your gut. Your gut is basically what has kept our species alive, because our ability to say, ooh, something doesn't feel right here, this doesn't seem okay, I think maybe this other option would be better, that little voice, that is your gut. And it's one of the primary reasons that we as a species are still alive. And there's a reason it hasn't been bred out of us. Rather, it's been maintained because it serves a purpose. So that's functionalism, which makes sense why he was so heavily influenced by Charles Darwin, because he truly believed, he was fully subscribed to survival of the fittest, evolution by experiences, different things like that. All right, so that generally concludes the consciousness side of the psych schools of thought. So these guys really lived in the whole idea of consciousness. And again, functionalism did have a behavioral piece in there, but it mainly looked at the purpose of certain behaviors and certain instincts, primarily instincts. Why instincts are so formative. Okay. So now we're going to move over into the world of behaviorism. So behaviorism is very well named because we're looking at behaviors. So, excuse me, for example, behaviorism is still a school of thought that is very prominently advocated for, and it's still used today. Applied behavioral analysis, which we will talk about a little bit later, is how we can actually train people to improve certain behaviors, certain maladaptive behaviors, which is a fancy way of saying bad stuff, or something that's like not good for you to do. So for example, a maladaptive behavior would be you're really depressed, so you overdrink. Okay, that's a maladaptive behavior. Or you're really upset about something, so you eat an entire box of Oreos. That's a maladaptive behavior. Sorry if anyone feels physically attacked by that one. I feel like we've all kind of had moments in time where we've overindulged. Thanksgiving doesn't count. But those maladaptive behaviors are ways that we cope with things. That's what applied behavioral analysis does. This is a very superficial way to put it, is we're going to replace those maladaptive behaviors with something positive, right? So you're really upset, you had a super emotional day, you're just drained, and all you want to do is eat. Okay, all you want to do is drink. Well, let's replace that with something positive. How about you go for a walk? How about you go to the gym? How about you draw? Ooh, how about you journal? Listen to music, meditate, volunteer. There's a million different things that you can do to replace that maladaptive behavior with something positive. And that's really what's going on in behaviorism, is we are what these guys are doing, Watson and Skinner, what these guys tried to do is to understand, okay, this person behaves this way because they learned that behavior through certain things. And that's all that we're looking at here. So Watson, he was the father of it. Watson really, he drove this home. He's the father of behaviorism. And what he believed is that all behaviors are in fact learned. All right. So he's kind of like a tabula rasa thing. I don't know if anyone remembers John Locke. Tabula rasa means that we were all born with a blank slate, which means that we have zero instincts. We are born completely blank, void of all knowledge, and as we live and experience different, you can think of it this way, different skills or instincts or thoughts are chiseled into that tablet, and those are the schools of thought, or those are the philosophies that we live by, that we operate by. So John Watson, he subscribed to something similar, but made it his own and said, we are born with nothing, and all behaviors that we have are learned. And you want to take it the next step further. If behaviors are learned, that means that they can be predicted and they can be controlled. Because if this stimulus or if this situation causes this behavior, that means I can elicit or I can stop a behavior. Or I know that someone is going to do this in this instance because they've learned it before. Excellent example. I didn't know if y'all's high school had a bell. I did when I was in high school. And it was, even if, I remember one day that they were like testing the bells or something like that, and it went off at the time that we weren't supposed to get up, and literally the entire class, completely like zombie level, we weren't even paying attention. I think we were all involved in the conversation, and everyone just got up and like went to go and leave. And it's like, well, class isn't over, but it was a learned behavior. That stimulus of the bell, just like instantly, we were so trained to react to it. That bell caused all of those behaviors, and it controlled us. So that's what Watson was getting at, is that all behaviors are learned, and if they're learned, that means that they can be predicted and they can actually be controlled. And the next level you want to take it to, if something is learned, that means it can also be unlearned. So this is all, it sounds kind of insidious, if you will. It sounds quite dark, like, ooh, you can control people. But that's really how it's done, and it's quite simple. If a behavior is learned, that means it can be unlearned. You can retrain it, and we'll go into that when we go through the learning chapter. I'll show you guys how all that works, how you can train something and then how you can untrain it. But behaviors can be learned. If they can be learned, they can be unlearned, or they can be connected to something else. So it shouldn't be any surprise that John B. Watson made a killing in the advertising industry. Once he realized how he could understand, predict, and control behaviors, because all behaviors are learned, he realized that he could actually capitalize on this and make a bunch of money. So those of you in marketing or wanting to go into marketing or advertising, anything like that, it's literally all behaviorism. All behaviorism. How can you learn, or rather teach a behavior and then predict it and control it to increase sales? That's all it is. That's why if you watch commercials, they cater to emotions. They cater to very specific things. They will cater to grief. They will cater to pain, which, side note, oddly enough, we connect with others more so through pain and misery than through any other emotion. Pain, trauma, grief. If you've been burnt by something, that is going to be the quickest connection to another human being. That's how we connect. We'll talk about that later, why that is. But it's, prove me wrong. I'll wait. But that's why also in his commercials, in advertising, we will kind of prey on those emotions. And then the other thing as well is many things are objectified or shown in a sexual light, because that actually, by sexualizing something, it kind of preys on our very primitive, very animalistic components. Because the two biggest motivators for humans and for most species is food and sex, right? Because those are the two things needed to survive. Food, of course, so we can actually survive, and then sex for reproduction, so our species can go on. So our two most profound, innate, and primitive motivators are food and sex, which is why commercials will usually include some type of food, or will sexualize something in some way, or they will sexualize food, which, like, I don't know if anyone remembers those Hardee's commercials that played for a little bit, where they had these beautiful women eating these burgers that were the size of their faces, and you know that these girls, like, did not eat those burgers. So by adding that in there, it increases attraction to the product. So that's all he did. That's all he did, is he found ways to lock in on human behaviors, to train certain things, to make certain emotional connections between a product and a buyer, and how to predict and control that behavior to have them buy more. It's kind of intense, but that's how it's done. That's how sales works. So you're welcome. Now, the next guy that we have here is Skinner. This guy. So B.F. Skinner, he was kind of in a similar world, but he believed that behavior is shaped by consequences of actions. Okay? So he didn't really cater to the whole, or subscribe to the whole idea of like mental processes or thoughts. He said that behaviors are based by consequences. They're all based by the consequences of your actions. And this is something that's actually seen very commonly as well. You know, when you were a little kid, you did something silly, like you wrote on the wall with a crayon. You might have gotten in trouble in some way, shape, or form. Perhaps you got a spanking, or you had, dessert taken away. Those are consequences of that behavior. Chances are you did not do that behavior again. So the consequence of that behavior shaped the likelihood of it occurring again. That's it. That's the whole concept of what Skinner introduced. This is also still used very much so today. Both of these guys are going to come up again when we go through the learning chapter, which is also a very nice way of saying how to train a human being or your dog, or that's all this is. This is all training, all behavior training. How can you make someone do something? According to Skinner, you provide a very specific consequence after that behavior. You want someone to do something again? You give them something that makes them happy, or you take away something that made them feel bad, leaving a happy emotion. So you do something to encourage the behavior to happen again. Positive consequence. If you don't want a behavior to happen again, you follow it up with something that they don't like. or take away something that they do like. So Skinner believed that we could virtually shape behavior and function purely based off of the consequences of those actions. So these two guys, or not these guys. So we have the behaviorists versus these are the old school psychologists over here. These guys were rivaling schools of thought, but the take home is that they are both equally essential in functioning. So the whole reason why I spent so much time going through all of these, and there's countless other contributors to the world of psych, there is no definitive answer for a question. It depends. It depends on what model you are using to answer the question, meaning, like, for example, why is this person depressed? Well, if you ask someone who's an existentialist, that means that they are depressed because they're afraid of their own mortality. They're afraid that they're going to die. Ask this why someone is depressed. It's a learned, if you ask like Watson or Skinner, it's a learned behavior. Perhaps others in their family are depressed, so they have learned to behave this way. You ask a biopsychologist, it's because there is a reduction in serotonin and there is decreased neurological activity in select parts of their brains. So it depends on who you ask. There's a million different concepts. You ask a cognitive psychologist or someone who practices cognitive therapy why someone is depressed. It's because they have maladaptive and negative thoughts, and those negative thoughts have created a cesspool of negative emotions, and that is thriving there. So all of these different schools of thought bear equal weight and contribute equally to the functioning of not only humans, but to the world of psych. So they're all equally essential. They all play a part, and they're all vital. So again, it depends on who you ask. by the way, what kind of question or what kind of answer you're going to get. So now that I have made that about as clear as mud for you, how we go through psych, now we're going to talk a little bit, this is kind of not lighter, but a little bit more about the treatment history of psych. So I won't spend too much time on this. I just kind of, I think going through this really does show how much we've grown as a field. We truly are still in our infancy as a science, but we really have come a very long way. So way, mental illness has existed since the dawn of time. Since there have been people, there has been mental illness. It's just how it goes. Now, way back in the day, the ideas of what caused mental illness were quite vast. It was believed at times that there were supernatural causes, like a person was possessed, God was mad at them, they were cursed, someone put a spell on them. A lot of it was more like spiritual or supernatural causes, religious causes, there's a demon in you, anything like that really. This one is probably my all-time favorite, the wandering uterus, which ladies, so apparently if you were a woman and you were having some degree of psychosis or just any type of mental illness, it was because your uterus was wandering about just freely throughout your body and caused pressure on nerves and organs and just caused odd behavior. You're welcome for that. That is not true. that is erroneous on all accounts. Our uterus is fixed, and mental illness is not linked to wandering organs. Another one that we have, Hippocrates, he believed that we need to balance the four humors, which is blood, black bile, yellow bile, and phlegm, to make sure that all of those humors are in balance. And if there's more or less of one or the other, you would need to either release or add a little bit of one. And this is actually where bloodletting came in. So like a phlebotomist, that was actually the French term for someone who would bleed you. So That was actually like a respected form of treatment. If someone was struggling with something, they would bleed you, which means that they would cut you and let you bleed. So the French term for that was a phlebotomist, which when you go to the doctor and you have your blood taken, guess what they're also called? A phlebotomist. So you're very welcome for that. So anytime you go to the doctor now, that's probably that little gem will pop up. So there you go. Now what we have here, you guys are probably staring at the skull with the atypical hole in it. These two are supposed to be here. These are eye sockets. So this right here, this is from what we call trephination. So trephination goes all the way back to about 6,500 BC, and it supposedly started around France. So it was used to treat head wounds, brain bleeds, epilepsy, and migraines, any type of mental illness. And it was in the world of mental illness, this was a means for the demon or the negative energy, whatever it was that was causing you distress. It was a means for it to escape. So trephination actually still does exist today. It's still practiced on a very sophisticated level. It is not plan A. I will say that right now. Usually when trephination is on the table, it's because you've tried countless other things. So yeah, usually it's not plan A, but it is still practiced today. Like I said, for head wounds, brain lesions, and epilepsy. For brain lesion, for brain bleeds, it's because if there is some type of wound and your brain is swelling, you do need to have a place to release the pressure, because the brain will swell and will actually bruise itself on your skull and cause even more damage. So trephination certainly does have a place. However, as a means to allow the demons to be released from your skull, not really much space for that there, but it does hold a place now. If you are interested in going down a hell of a rabbit hole, there is a woman who actually did trephination on herself with a drill. It's extremely fascinating. If you want to check out the interview with her, her name is Amanda Fielding, and she did this not too recently. About the early 70s that she did it, and she said the reason she wanted to do it was to open up her mind. So I'll just, if you want to look into it, go for it. It's very, very interesting. She's an absolutely brilliant woman, so her take on it is really unique. But medically speaking, trephination definitely has a place. So the reason I wanted to share this is because we truly have come an extremely long way on our understanding of psych and where different psychopathologies arise. And again, we truly only do have different theories on what causes certain psychopathologies. There's only 2 disorders that we know for sure where they came from. So we really have evolved quite a bit. Even in terms of just understanding different human dynamics. For example, sexual orientation, we really haven't been able to, and even gender and gender identity and gender expression, all of those components have not really been understood well until somewhat recently. It was actually in the 1970s that homosexuality was no longer deemed a mental disorder. So, which is, I mean, that's 50 years ago. So we've come a very, very long way, very quickly, to really actually understand the true epidemiology and the true presentation. Epidemiology meaning roots. So the true roots of disorders, when something actually is a disorder, and how to really kind of pin down what something looks like and where it came from. So our treatments are far more sophisticated now. We'll just do one last thing real quick. I don't even think I did give this to you guys. So this is wild. This is just kind of for funsies. So this guy, if you want to watch this, go for it, but just buyer beware. It is a little bit gruesome. Actually, it's quite gruesome. So if you aren't really into, eye stuff, but just to show how far we've actually come by the way of treatments. So now we primarily operate in the world of psychopharmacology. So when it comes to treatment, it's mostly just through pharmaceuticals. Although there are still some psychosurgeries that are still practiced today, and they're very, very successful. But psychopharmacology tends to be the front line of treatment. And then once someone goes through a variety of cocktails and they're not seeing any relief, that's when other approaches tend to be more they're presented more. But Walter Freeman, this guy was the founder of what we call the transorbital lobotomy, which was a very gruesome technique that was administered in the early 1950s, where he would basically distort the frontal lobe of the brain using an ice pick, entering in through the eyeball. I know it's gross. But he would enter in through actually right in between the eyeball and the eyelid, and he would disturb the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe is where your personality is housed. And, well, at least, if you want to give it an address, your personality, who you are, what makes you do what you do, personality, judgment, reasoning, decision-making, all of that is housed, impulse control, all of that is housed in your frontal lobe. So if there is any type of symptomatology that is going on, he believed that if we distorted or disturbed the connections in the frontal lobe, that would basically stop all symptomatology. And it did, but it also left a it was a very gruesome approach. Luckily, it was not really on the scene for too long. It was replaced by Thorazine pretty quickly in the 1960s, 1970s. He did have some patients die. Actually, I believe just a few, but he was no longer able to do this procedure in 1967 when he lost a patient on the table. Very gruesome, very primitive, just a rough form of treatment. But the reason why I want to bring this up is because, it's only in the 1950s when this was being done, which is 70 years ago. And, we really have come a very long way in how we treat and how we assess. So lobotomies or transorbital lobotomies are still practiced, but they're far more sophisticated. They're actually no longer I don't believe they actually are still transorbital, because that means through the eye. But lobotomies are still done, which is where you remove a piece of the lobe or distort a piece of the lobe. And the point of that is if you remove a tainted piece, then it will improve overall functioning. We'll get into that a little bit more, but again, I just like to bring this up because he is very famous in the historic world of treatment, and I would be remiss if I didn't discuss him. But he is kind of rough. So again, that's why I really don't kind of like to spend too much time on him. If you're okay with gruesome stuff, please feel free to check out this video. If eye stuff is weird for you, don't watch it, just save yourself. But it is really quite fascinating how this goes. So yeah, far more sophisticated form of treatment now. Alright guys, so that is the end of the first part of the lecture. So hopefully you guys get a good bit out of this, and you now have a solid understanding of what psych is, the different subfields of psychology, and the history of psych, all the different interpretations of it, the formative years really, and how that has gotten us to where we are today. So the next lecture will go into research methods, which is going to be a bit more sciencey as opposed to more abstract and philosophical, because we kind of live in that world today. So, but I hope this was helpful. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. And yeah, see you next time. Take it easy.